Shosh, can you discuss this from India?
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Hey guys, I think when preparing this talk, the main kind of like my main motive was to kind of portray the whole economic like transformation of India, but I really also wanted to kind of show the broader picture. So kind of wanted to show like the kind of social, historical, and also cultural like kind of points of view. So hopefully you can learn something, find it a bit interesting. This is just a few basic stats just about India. You guys know, kind of really densely populated country, population of 1.2 billion, nominal GDP 1.8 trillion. Kind of is there. Oh, actually, I forgot to do that. What I usually like, what I have been interested in is also just people's like from the outside, people's like perception of like what India is, and I usually like try to look for a volunteer, but Marcus, if you had like to associate three things with India, what three things would you associate it with?
Okay, I'm trying to be quite PC here. Hollywoods, Slumdog Millionaire, Robert Potts.
It's a good selection. I'd say three common things that I'd say people would associate India with would be, I'd go, yeah, Bollywood, tick one answer, cricket, and probably also Indian food. But like, I feel like India is so much more than that. Not Slumdog Millionaire. No, India is, I feel, a lot more. Apart from the historical and also the cultural aspects, I think it's just, I find it absolutely fascinating, the whole kind of economic transformation. I'm a little bit biased because obviously originally being from India and my whole family, but I think really to kind of appreciate, we kind of look at first the independence, where it started India got independence in 1947, so it was pretty much, it was really happened all between like a struggle between the Indian independence movement and then the British government. And the Indian independence movement was led by Mahatma Gandhi, who, as you guys would know, was a peace activist. And he was led also with his like right lieutenant. The gentleman on my right is called Nehru. And these guys had really different views on economic policies. Gandhi was like really just wanted really simple. He wasn't interested in power. Nehru, on the other hand, he had this like really like socialistic kind of point of view. Really kind of believed in like a kind of a collective action. At the time, the East were doing a lot better than the West, and he kind of wanted to emulate like the Soviet Union. So this period right here, the post-independence years, is about 25 years. Just to summarize, it's not the greatest years in Indian economic history, but it's interesting to go through. I think so when India got independence, obviously being by the sheer size of the nation and the population, they have a really large GDP, but per capita income it's very low, so like standard of living is really poor, as you'd imagine. In some ways you could argue they did have like a developed capitalist economy. Like some of the oldest Asian institutions, capitalist institutions in Asia were in India, like the Bombay Stock Exchange, which had been formed far before this. They did have like manufacturing sectors, textile industry, relatively strong textile industry, and also steel industries, but pretty much very limited. I'd say it's a very thin economy, certainly not market-based, but predominantly like a really subsistence economy just going on. So this is kind of the first beginning of really this kind of like socialist kind of reforms coming in. This is like kind of Nehru's vision kind of getting in place. Just before like Nehru went to jail, there's a political party in India called the Indian Congress Party. And at this time, that's actually the symbol for the Congress Party right there. And at this time, really, they had a monopoly of the government, so anything that went through, they could pass. So what really happened was Nehru's vision of kind of this collective action, none of this capitalist acquisitiveness, very much just wanted to make India great, develop a modern economy. So he believed the state should seize control of everything of the economy, and really India kind of suffered from some of these things that went through, really slow growth for the next 40 years. This is another important kind of reform that happened. It was called License Raj. License Raj, it pretty much meant the government really, everything needed permission. It was really highly regulatory. Anything from businesses expanding, businesses having to, even just make a simple product, you had to go through sometimes 80 agencies just to get one product. And India during this time did a policy of import substitution. So it pretty much meant that they didn't import any other goods. Everything that they did was made in India. But the big problem, and you kind of see later on that it becomes a massive crisis, is that they had this balance of payment pressures. And sorry, something I did forget to mention was Indira Gandhi, she actually did a nationalization of the top 14 banks. Did you see in the newspaper article? Later in 1980, all the banks in India become nationalized. 1966, another big year in Indian history, because this is a year before the famous devaluation in the UK. Devaluation in India of the rupee happened for several reasons. Say two of the main reasons are in 1965, India had a really massive war with Pakistan, and that depleted all the government's budget. Also in 1966. The USA stopped giving trade to India, which was a massive blow. And the reasons for that was because I think India didn't support the Vietnam War, and also there was also a few kind of international trade reasons, not opening trade. So that really hurt India. And during this period in time, it's a really painful period for the Indian economy. During early 1970s, there's a growth rate of about 3 to 4%, which is described as Hindu rate of growth. And huge tax rise, which hopefully I can show you a little graph which will kind of illustrate that. So this is kind of if you guys can see, if you go to 66, there's a huge financing gap, just simply because there was no foreign aid at that time and a huge trade deficit. Then this kind of shows the inflation during the time. What you really have during this period, you can kind of see during 66, inflation really kind of begins to cross 10%. And then as things, if you can't imagine, get any kind of worse, they do. During 1971, there's a global financial crisis, and then 74 to 75, there's a major oil crisis, and inflation is peaking up near the 25% area. This kind of illustrates the really high tax rates at the time. So you can imagine it's a really, really bad time right now. However, things do get a little bit better. What happens is India goes through a process of liberalization. I'd say between 1980 to 1990, the economy slightly improves, just simply because the Indian government started putting a lot of investing into the economy. How, a word of caution is that this investment was coming really from borrowed money, so it was just an expansion of their fiscal deficit. Actually, before I get on to 1991, because that's one of the biggest moments in Indian economic history, it's the start of a huge expansion in Indian growth. Many economists argue what that growth that happened from 1991. The seeds of it were sown kind of in 1980. There were a few reforms that happened, liberal reforms that happened. Example is broad branding. So just to describe broad branding, if we have an entrepreneur, basically, so we have Christian, great entrepreneur, goes across. The state will come to Christian and they'll say, this product that you make, Christian, you can only make that product and that's it, you can't use it for anything else. But what broad branding does, it's not huge, doesn't make a huge difference, but basically says, with that product you have now, you can now use it for other things for yourself.
itself. So it's not huge, but it's like a step in the right direction. There's little things like deregulation of the trucking industry, but the main, what's described as the tipping point in Indian economic history is 1991, simply because there was a big crisis. India nearly went into default. Really, maybe that could be a little exaggeration, but they were very close to going bankrupt, and simply because they had this huge balance of payment crisis. And this was really, the reason why it's such a big moment was because, not only because of the crisis, but it was a huge stimulus and a huge catalyst for this growth, because what happened then was major reform, major just reforms, and the person you see here responsible for the big expansion you see in the 90s, and also early 21st century is Manmohan Singh. He was the finance minister at the time, he's the current president of India. And yeah, definitely, it was a huge moment.
Sorry, did you say current president?
Sorry, Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies. And what really happened is, at this time, Manmohan Singh, the reason why such globalization happened was that he got rid of all these kind of policies. So he got rid of all these like kind of socialist reforms that was really holding India back. So things like the license Raj, like ban on foreign investment. So there's a lot more like freer trade and interaction within international countries like the US. So really what's really happening is like investment, trade, and also tax systems are all becoming liberalized. And slowly but surely, there's like financial reform also happening. So the CIC becomes abolished, and companies can just like lend a lot more freely with each other. So what we're really getting right now is during this era of like globalization, there's just increased international trade, a freer economy, and this is really helping like reduce the big fiscal deficit that the country has, which caused the initial crisis in 1991. So cool. What are the effects of this whole expansion in India? There was a substantial fall in poverty through the 90s. Stock markets certainly had a huge flurry of activity. I'd certainly say like before the 90s there was a real like high regulatory atmosphere. There wasn't much like really activity going on. Now there was like a lot of IPOs going on. Well, also like one thing that did happen during this period that kind of put down was like the 97 Asian financial crisis, but that didn't really affect India because at that time they didn't really borrow that much money. There are also other reasons which I won't quite go into, but one of the biggest things though during this period was the rise of India's IT sector. So this really, Indians began to pride themselves on this sector because they, not just in India but in the world, they became world leaders, and it was a real niche. And even to this day, a lot of Indians are outsourced to like the US for technology. So companies like Infosys were really doing well. Another big thing is this whole free entrepreneurial like kind of environment really created an atmosphere for like people to strive and become successful. And you saw the emergence of big billionaires. So yeah, India now I think has 58 billionaires. So it's like it's fourth in the world in terms of billionaires. But does anyone know who the guy is on my very far right? Yeah, he's the obviously sixth richest in the world, 31.1 billion. From India, richest in India, richest in the UK. So, and do you guys know the two other guys on the left?
The Ambani brothers.
Yep. Mukesh Ambani on the far left with 27 billion, and his brother Anil Ambani with a measly 8.8 billion. So these guys. And has anyone seen like Mukesh Ambani? Have you seen Mukesh Ambani's like house, his new house? I've seen it's the most expensive property in the world. First billion property. It's called the Antia. It's got 27 floors, 3 helipads. It's got business around the world. Multiple swimming pools, 6 floors of parking, and a series of floating gardens. So
it doesn't look too pretty on the outside, but I saw pictures inside. It looks pretty lush. But the really kind of like whole funny thing about it is that it's actually abandoned at the moment. He had plans of moving in, but he hasn't moved in simply because there's a little superstition that some Indians have where you've got to, building's got to be facing kind of the sunset. And he felt that there weren't enough windows on the east side of the building, so he's not moving his family in for superstition reasons. So unfortunately, it's abandoned. The whole $1 billion. So this kind of just back to the economics. This is like it's a bit of a side note, but this was the whole exponential growth during the 90s of India, and also early 21st century. Really, you can kind of see it really expanding fast. However, there are a few things which I have hidden during this like great time. India does like still have its problems and it's hidden. With all the billionaires that there is a huger and bigger gap between the poor and the rich. Like I think about the 100 richest people in India have assets equivalent to 25% of the country's GDP. Another unfortunate thing which hurts me to say is like poverty is a real issue as well. Even though it did substantially decrease, it still is an issue. I think I saw a stat, I think it's quite controversial, it was released by the World Bank. The average Indian lives on less than $2 per day, poorest living on probably 50 cents. There's also, debt-ridden farmers who kill themselves. There's hundreds of really, there's sad things that are hidden across the glamour that you may see. So it does have its problems, but to go back to the actual, the whole context and the question at the start is this whole like growth story that India's gone through over now. At the moment, you guys probably seen like yesterday, it was shown like India's growth it is gone up to now 6.1%. Really kind of like a stagnant economy. Sometimes like people argue now this slowdown is worse than the actual 2008 financial crisis. Manufacturing industries are down. Really weakening currency. Foreign investment's been taken out of the country. Government's been hit by scandal after scandal, corruption scandal. Real indecisiveness in parliament. So it's a really hard time, and of course not to mention huge inflation. My favourite bank, Standard Chartered, recently said, unless action happens from the government to stimulate growth, the outlook looks quite ominous. In terms of where I see India in the future, is that I feel the cause of what has happened is, or this current situation is, kind of really indecisiveness in leadership, and really down I feel political, very much self-inflicted, and as I phrased it, kind of a paralysis in leadership and decision making. I really feel that if the structure is right and there is a lot more decisiveness, it's easier said than done in terms of the politics. I feel that with India's like youth, they've got such a large young population coming through. I feel that definitely growth that India was talking about before of double digits is still possible, and I don't think it's the last chapter in the story. So thank you guys for listening. If you guys got any questions, just fire ahead, unless we got time. Yes?
So can you comment on the role of sort of family-owned conglomerates?
Family-owned conglomerates.
So particularly the Ride brothers and our stock in SR Energy, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it started off as like really early as how do you describe it? Kind of like caste system, a little bit. So like there was a little caste that you were kind of put into. It's kind of developed. I mean, just to describe the Ambanis are a huge, like one of the most powerful family in India at the moment. To answer your question, I do not know too much about their conglomerates, unfortunately.
That's going to inhibit growth of like foreign investors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because they're
like
killing their own
family and
monopoly.
business.
Definitely. Yeah. But I couldn't perfectly answer that. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think are the political policies should the Indian government push ahead with?
Yeah, big criticism of the Indian government is that they're not the monetary tight it's too tight. Like there's they're not putting enough investment.
What's interest rates for Bank of India?
Interest rates, I think they're really low. I mean, they're ultra low. But it's not that. That's another criticism because inflation is so high as well. You know, the interest rates of the RBI has been like really criticised. Another big thing is with the actual like foreign is getting foreign investment, attracting foreign investment, and the Indian government they made a huge big U-turn in terms of attracting foreign investment. First they didn't want to get foreign investment in. They closed the retail sector because they didn't want it to compete with Indian businesses, and then they were like, yeah, we actually need the investment, so then they did it. But it was just so slow, the foreign investors lost confidence, and they didn't see it as an attractive market. So it definitely attracted foreign investment decisively.
India right now is 7.5%.
7.5%. Oh, really? Sorry, yeah, 7.5%. Thanks to Dimitri. Yep.
Well, there was an elaborate discussion about the first 40 years having really slow growth, and mainly because of government policies and the left parties and the Indian National Congress and the liberalization of 1991. But there was a really quick slide about the GDP during that period. I mean, the exponential growth, as you said, about the GDP. My question is, what's the influence of the Indian IT sector on the GDP?
Okay, yeah. So you're talking about the period from 1990 in terms of...
Go back to the slide for the GDP. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. How much of an influence did the IT sector have?
Yeah.
Absolutely massive influence. I think it was definitely one of the biggest contributors. I'll show you this. The graph here shows the sectors in terms of, you'll see like, in terms of India, this is when it really began that the manufacturing really wasn't the most dominant sector, and you kind of saw the services sector really increase. I would definitely say IT was the main reason.